The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
I'd like to welcome you to my course, Working Capital Optimization, an Approach to Unlocking Enterprise Value. I'm Ernie Humphrey, the CEO and founder of 360 Thought Leadership Consulting. I've been squarely in the arena of corporate treasury for over 15 years as a treasury manager at a fast-growing middle-market NASDAQ-traded company, working with thought leaders and developing educational programs focused on the Office of the CFO, as a Director of Treasury Services, and as a Director of the Corporate Treasurers Council for the Association for Financial Professionals, as the Vice President of Marketing and Educational Programs for Performative, and most recently as the CEO of 360 Thought Leadership Consulting and as an Executive Director at the CFO Alliance. I will do my very best to deliver the ROI you deserve for your valuable time in listening to my course. As such, I have specific learning objectives for our time today. They define my promise to you in terms of specific takeaways for you in spending your valuable time with me on this course. At the end of this course, I hope to improve your company's understanding of the impacts that the hows and whys of cash flows can have on your company's bottom line, empower you to identify inefficiencies in your company's current working capital management strategy, empower you to develop and deliver a quality working capital management business plan to company leaders, and give you specific advice for how to identify the benefits to your company in improving the visibility of cash balances, cash inflows, and cash outflows. Before I dive into the presentation, I want to offer you a roadmap for how I'm going to deliver on the learning objectives. First, I'm going to begin with a working capital overview to set the stage for our content. Then, I'm going to discuss how to elevate the cash IQ at your company, not only within your Treasury department, but beyond, as I believe this is the key to effective working capital management. Then, I'm going to go over procedures that will allow you to identify specific opportunities to improve working capital management at your plan. And then after you've identified those opportunities, I'm going to give you some specific advice for how to create a working capital battle plan and also tactics for how to sell it efficiently within your organization. Then we're going to discuss how to execute your working capital battle plan. Then we're going to take a step up and we're going to talk about ABCs of success in executing a treasury project or any professional project you may have under your purview. Then I'm going to offer you some resources related to effective working capital management and some final thoughts. So let's begin in order to set the context with our definition of working capital. For our purposes today, we're going to define working capital as current assets minus current liabilities. For current assets, we'll have cash, accounts receivable, short-term investments, and inventory. For current liabilities, we have accounts payable and short-term notes payable. We're really going to focus here today on cash, accounts receivable, and accounts payable, and we will pay some attention to inventory. In terms of effective working capital management, I have seen and still continue to see companies take a siloed approach to working capital management, i.e., they will look at AR or AP or cash in isolation. And even when companies look at cash, it is not in a broad enough context. Working capital optimization is the optimization of the flow of working capital. Cash is key and cash is king, and it drives all other working capital components. If we take a look at the diagram on the screen, if we look at the right side in order products, receive products, pay for products, that's more of the accounts payable side. And then as we go to sell finished goods, receive cash, that's where we have the accounts receivable side. In Treasury, I feel in the past we've spent a lot of time, maybe too much time on the accounts receivable side. Understood. However, what we're starting to see in the market is more of a focus on the accounts payable side with advances in technology. So on the AR side, what we've started to see is a focus on customer relationship management, which is fantastic. And I believe we can use these same techniques and similar systems to look at supplier relationship management so we can optimize the cash conversion cycle and optimize cash deployment across the enterprise. And there are synergies that exist, so we need to look at these trade-offs. So when any working capital component is looked at in a siloed approach, which I also mean in that it's not really considering the impact on other parts of the business, that's when we run into inefficiencies. So before we get into effective working capital management, I'd like to look at some common inherent barriers to effective working capital management. And companies can really impact the quality of working capital management by removing or mitigating one or more of these inherent barriers, oftentimes with just improvements in processes. So some inherent barriers that I've seen, we already mentioned when working capital management is managed in silos. Also, there can be a lack of visibility into real-time working capital components, values, cash, AP, AR, and also the dynamics of working capital movement. So how are these, what are the movements in and out of cash, and how are they affecting AP and AR as well? And then we have another inherent barrier relative to the technology side. So information relative to working capital is often housed in disparate systems, often in different locations and sometimes in different countries. And the systems really in the past have not been designed to communicate with each other, if at all. So there's two issues going on. There's a quality of information that is impacted, and there's also inefficiencies in just consolidating the information and having that visibility. Also, a couple of huge inherent barriers to getting an investment in working capital approved. Company leaders do not view working capital management as strategic, and I believe that barrier has gone down and is going lower, but it still can be there. And then companies leaders don't understand the hard cost of ineffective working capital management. So it's our job as Treasury professionals to educate our senior management on the cost of inefficient working capital management utilization, whether it's inefficiencies in time wasted in all the processes or inefficiencies in the use of capital that costs us to invest when we don't need, when we borrow when we don't need to borrow, and invest in suboptimal investment opportunities. And I said that I do not want to look at working capital management in a siloed approach, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to optimize working capital in one project. So you may need to tackle working capital optimization in steps, but focusing on one component does not mean you ignore the other components and the relative dynamics. So one project may help set the stage for the next project depending on the interdependencies of each component. So I want to go over how you can prioritize working capital components. So the first thing that you need to do in terms of all the working capital components is map the relationships within and across all processes. What you want to do is you want to look at people, process, and technology across AP, AR, cash, and inventory, and accounts payable. And then you want to create a set of matrices to assist you in identifying opportunities and then in assembling a battle plan to define the scope of the project. So that's at a very high level. So in my mind, again, I'll talk about this often during this course. It all starts with visibility. One of my favorite sayings is, if you can't see it, you can't manage it effectively. So you need to consider the visibility of working capital components. And when you're looking at where to focus, what I would call the low-hanging fruit to start, you want to identify areas which your department currently has control. They're going to be the easiest ones to influence oftentimes. And then the next category would be identify areas that your department may influence but not control. That may be a little bit of a higher uphill battle. And then finally, identify areas that your department does not currently influence, which I hope that is not the case in Treasury at your organization. But that kind of sets the bar in terms of the inherent barriers. It's not that you can't impact these areas, it's just you need to know going in what types of obstacles you might face, and they might be due to the people side of the equation, where people have ownership of things and they might not want to change. So there may be some more convincing that you need to do, and you may need more senior management push in order to get things started. But in terms of identifying the right components, I believe it's going to start with cash. As I mentioned before, cash is king. So we'll start by taking a look at cash and how to effectively manage cash. So I talked about in the introduction about elevating your cash IQ. So there are really 5 components to the cash IQ. On the surface, they seem simple, and what I'll do later in the course is I'll go through a case study and show that really answering these questions is not as easy as you might think on the surface, especially if your company has operations across the nation and even more so across the globe. So here's the components. You understand where cash is coming and going, so that gives us the visibility. Next step down is why it is coming and or going there, and then how it is coming and or getting there. So how are you making payments? How are you receiving payments? What are the efficiencies around both sides of that equation? How long cash takes to arrive and or get there? So are there bottlenecks in terms of receiving cash and also in getting invoices paid where you might be missing out on discounts? And then more and more of a key now in our time of increased governance and scrutiny and risk management, which is a good thing, who controls cash movements and why. So some of that gets down to what type of centralization of control that your company is going to need in terms of optimizing cash deployment. So in terms of cash is king, how would we go about looking at cash in terms of an opportunity to improve working capital efficiency? So in terms of that, you want to review and map existing internal processes for all movements of cash. Some of this may seem basic to you, but I think it's important that we flush this out, because it just gives you a check to make sure that you've got all your bases covered. So when someone asks you what are all the sources of cash in and cash out, as a Treasury person, you might think that's easy, and for you, it might be on some level, but this gives you a check. If you were to ask someone outside of Treasury, even the CFO, I think you'd be surprised at how much they really don't understand. So they don't know what they don't know. So part of this process is for you to educate others in your organization about the cash inflows and outflows and the impact that employees across the enterprise have on these cash inflows and outflows. So for cash out, we'll look to accounts payable. How are we going to pay our bills? We're going to use checks, wires, ACH. We're going to pay taxes. If we're a publicly traded company, we might have dividend payments. We're going to have intercompany payments. And if we're in a position or borrowing position, we might have short-term investments. We could also have long-term investments. And then cash in, we can have obviously flowing through accounts receivable. We can receive checks, wires. We can also receive intercompany payments. Obviously, those would be checks, wires, or electronic payments. And another point here, it's not only the movements of cash, it's the currency as well. So in addition to the amounts going back and forth, the currencies and flows are important in terms of foreign currency risk exposures from translation and transaction exposures that we have. So again, it seems like this is kind of basic, but it's really good to go through this exercise. And again, I'll go through a case study where I went through this exercise in painstaking detail, just to give you an idea of what that might look like and what some of the pitfalls are in going through this type of exercise and in centralizing cash management from subsidiaries across the globe. So now I want to walk us through a case study which involves centralizing cash management across 15 countries. This discussion will outline a project I managed while I was a Treasury manager. And what I'll be doing here is I'll be putting some context around what I've discussed thus far and what we will discuss. For my project, my first task was to map all cash inflows and outflows for all our subsidiaries across the globe, and that entailed over 60 bank accounts in 15 countries. I had to map what systems were used, who was using them, review of all signatories on all bank accounts to see who was controlling movements of cash and make sure those were all in order. I'd like to make the point, cash management is about visibility and control. Of course, I love the saying, I've already said it once, if you can't see it, you can't manage it. So I had to review the visibility we had, the blind spots we had, and really had to figure out how to fill them before I started redefining how cash was going to be deployed across the globe. So what I've got up here is just a diagram to give you the sense of what types of challenges that we face. So in terms of managing, mapping the cash inflows and outflows in the United States, we had sales and distribution in the United States, and we also had several manufacturing facilities in the United States. We had sales and distribution in Australia. We had sales and distribution in Canada. We had sales and distribution in Mexico, and then what was going on at the time of this project is we were in the process of forming a maquila in Mexico, which was going to transfer quite a bit of our manufacturing for the United States to Mexico. So that obviously was going to have a big impact for cash inflows and outflows, both short-term and long-term. We had a holding company in the Netherlands. We had sales and distribution in Japan. We had sales and distribution and some component manufacturing in China, and we had sales and distribution in Taiwan. And then over in Europe, in Germany, we had manufacturing, sales, and distribution in Germany. At the time, we had sales and distribution and manufacturing in the Czech Republic. We had sales, manufacturing, and distribution in Italy. And we had sales and distribution and some light manufacturing in South Africa. So as you can see from that overview, there was quite a bit to handle. And at the time, the task seemed pretty daunting. And actually, it was daunting. But it ended up being a very informative exercise, not only for myself, but also for everyone involved in the Treasury Department and our CFO and even our CEO. So our CEO understood the challenges that we had and really understood the strategic value that we offered the organization. So just in this diagram here, this was where we were at and kind of in process when I got involved in the Treasury Department. This was a structure that we had. It was loose, and we were still working on decentralizing the operations. So at the very top, we had our Treasury Center in Indianapolis, Indiana. So we were to have direct control over the inflows and outflows for the United States, Australia, Canada, Mexico, Netherlands, Japan, China, and Taiwan. And then we were, at that time, had a Treasury Center in Germany where they were really managing the cash inflows and outflows and working capital in Germany, Italy, the Czech Republic, and South Africa. And then part of what we were doing was we were looking at the optimal role of centralization and looking to see if we might be able to, in a sense, even remove that Germany Treasury Center and move even more up of that control up to our main corporate headquarters in Indianapolis, Indiana. What we ended up doing was we ended up pulling a lot of the control back up to the Treasury Center, but a lot of the day-to-day cash operations, we felt they were best left in Germany and in the specific countries, part of them because of the specific bank relationships, the strong bank relationships that we had overseas, and just the understanding of the mechanics and what needed to take place and when in terms of the working capital efficiency. So we realized the expertise that we had overseas was something that we didn't want to lose in terms of impacting the working capital efficiency at our company. So to just take us through a little bit of a deeper dive here to look at some of the flows we had to look at. So in terms of our corporate account, we had a master account, and then this is a United States-based company, so you'll see we had lockboxes, and we actually had lockboxes at one time at 3 different banks, and that was because of the acquisition strategy that we were going through. So in addition to all of these flows going on, we were into a heavy phase of acquisitions at our company. So we have lockbox receipts. We still got miscellaneous checks, so it might be dating myself just a bit, but this was before we had remote deposit capture and you could take checks on your phone. We had electronic funds receipts, obviously from our customers. We also had a dual currency lockbox in Canada, and then we had our intercompany electronic funds receipts as well. And then on the disbursement side for the U.S. corporate headquarters, we had ZBA accounts for payroll, payables, and then we had a subsidiary payroll account for foreign acquisition. What we ended up doing was once we acquired a company, our goal was obviously to roll up the accounts payable into our corporate AP account. Sometimes that took a while. So given how aggressive we were on the acquisition front, it was oftentimes that we had at least one subsidiary AP account going on. We were self-funded up to a point for our medical expenses. So we had a medical account, and we had a dividend account as we were a publicly traded company, and we had quarterly dividends. We had electronic payments that were going out. So we had ACHs and electronic wire payments and intercompany payments. And at the time, as I mentioned, we were starting to go through a phase where we were going to change how we manufactured our product from high-cost to low-cost countries. So that started in Mexico. So on the electronic payment side, that really facilitated volume there. And we were also down the road going to be doing that overseas as well in transforming some of our manufacturing from Germany to the Czech Republic. So that was another thing we had to really consider when we were looking at how to redefine our cash management structure. We had purchase cards, and CFOs, if there's any on the course, will be cringing for petty cash, but we did used to have petty cash. But as soon as we got our purchase cards really up and going, we were able to finally eliminate that. And then in the case where we had excess funds in the short term, we did have a short-term investment portfolio. And then in terms of the receipt side, we managed to mitigate a lot of the transaction exposure by billing our subsidiaries in U.S. dollars. So we had receipts from Australia, Japan, and both two German subsidiaries, from Mexico. So from Mexico as well. So we had to get involved on looking at some of the foreign currency transactions that were going on. When I got involved in the project, they were decentralized. So what was going on was some of these subsidiaries were just calling the banks and saying, I want to sell you this much Australian dollars. How many U.S. dollars are you going to get? So they were sending money back. There wasn't much of a process. They weren't really pulling off exactly the open invoices. So it caused a lot of headaches on the cash application side. So as we were able to establish the visibility and the control in order to move that cash, the foreign exchange management was pulled up to the corporate level, and I was able to move the money back to our parent company and exactly match open invoices, and also, in a sense, manage at a high level the cash that was being held at the foreign subsidiaries. Just like anyone else, they used to pad cash. They used to hang on to cash without realizing the implications of that. So that was a big part. So once I understood what was going on, so on the surface, I couldn't tell how the money was getting back, how they were doing the foreign exchange transaction. And once I mapped these processes, okay, I would talk to Jenny. Jenny, how are you doing this? Then after she told me, after I took an internal gasp, like, yikes, okay, then we got to the place where we were actually able to take control and really improve on our foreign currency FX exposure management. So in terms of intercompany disbursements, we had disbursements going the other way. So our subsidiaries would bill us in their functional currency. So that meant that we had to purchase foreign currencies, including pesos, New Taiwanese dollars, and euros as well. So we had to manage those exposures as well. And then we had to look at how were we really buying currency as well. And we had to go back and really shop that currency business, because it was just being done in order to spread the pie between our banks who were in our credit facility. Just wanted to throw out for a moment just to show some of the complications in controlling cash in China and just getting cash in there. This may have changed a bit, but note here is that if you're doing business in other countries, whether it's sales, distribution, and manufacturing, things become a lot more complicated. You may have more institutions involved, so you really have to get into the weeds quite a bit and really work well with the folks on the ground over there and understanding how things are going on, and you want to make sure that they are telling you how they're moving money and how, because there are serious legal implications if it's not done correctly. Now we'll take a little bit of a look over on the German subsidiary side and see what challenges we had there in getting a handle on their in their receipts, disbursements, and intercompany transactions. So our German subsidiary, they actually were not able to only sell in euro, so they had customers that demanded U.S. dollars, so they had some currency exposure. So in Germany, there was some, they were in the position of accepting U.S. dollars, so we had to manage that exposure as well. So in Germany, they also got miscellaneous checks and bank deposits. They got much more on the electronic fund side, but then they still did. They did still have some checks as well. So we needed to go in and see what systems they were using, how they were using them, were those efficient. So we actually had our treasurer go over there and sit next to the person who was managing cash, just so we really understood what they were doing. So when we were going to make changes, they knew that we had a vested interest in what they were doing because we understood what they were doing. So that was the subsidiary. On the receipt side, on the disbursement side, generally it was they were okay in euros, but again they had to have some dual currency accounts because they were involved in two different business lines. So again, just trying to show some of the complexities here, some of the things we needed to manage, some of the eye-opening things that we really had a sense on. In our case, we really didn't have consolidated visibility into the cash inflows and outflows. So this is really the first step. So I had these arrows going right for euros, going all these places. I really didn't know what the volumes were, what our consolidated positions were, whether or not we were long or short, and how effective the hedging was going on. So I was really learning some of the blind spots that we had in terms of foreign currency exposure. So I really, at the very beginning, I didn't know where to look. So then we had to go back and say, okay, how do we get the reporting done to this? So our top level goal was to get a global bank, which could help us get visibility into all these accounts and then subsequently help us manage these flows. But this painful process was extremely valuable in looking at the currency positions and really understanding the currency pairs in which we needed to understand in terms of those risk exposures. Really quickly, some intercompany payments. So we had, again, on that big side of it, they were able to bill in euros, so they were able to just someone to look at the flows, look at what's really coming in and how we are looking long and short in terms of euro on a consolidated basis. And then the German sub, so they had some intercompany payments, so we had to help control and manage those as well. And then I just want another country which is a little bit tricky is South Africa. So again, there were some I'd say some strange regulations there. We had to have a specific accounts for parent properties, and so it just gets a little bit complicated in having bank accounts all over the world. What I'm seeing more and more in the cash management space is that some of the accounts payable providers are actually allowing companies to pay them a certain amount, let's say a consolidated amount of dollars, and then they're affecting all the FX transactions for them, so that they might not need to hold bank accounts in foreign countries. Obviously, two things. you got to make sure of the country's regulations that you may have to hold a bank account in country, and also you need to look at the FX rates that they're giving you. But if they're giving you decent FX rates and mitigating the need for you to have bank accounts in these other countries, that can be huge in terms of on the efficiency standpoint. And so one of the things that I found very helpful in my endeavor was that we had all these great process flow diagrams that were a Christmas present from Sarbanes-Oxley. So this was another way to really look at who was involved in these processes, where inefficiencies were going on, where there were manual processes, and sometimes there were processes that were really conflicting with each other in terms of efficiency. So these are things that if you had them, you might be able to pull them back out and really understand the processes. So if you're looking at AP, you can really dig in on AP, and this is just outgoing wire transfers. So I think those are can be extremely valuable. So now let's switch gears a little bit. So now let's pivot back a little bit from cash. So I hope that my case study was valuable in some sense. And really part of what I mentioned was taking a looking at that cash IQ. On paper, it seems really easy to impact that cash IQ, but when you look at those 5 questions that I put up, you really need to look at where your company stands in terms of those 5 questions and how you really elevate your IQ via those 5 areas. So let's take it up a little. So I said cash is definitely something you need to look at. So in terms of prioritizing, maybe AP, AR, inventory, let's look at the component selection. This is my process. Again, some of these things seem simple, but they're enlightening to me as I went through this process and as I've been talking to Treasury professionals over the last 6 to 8 years in helping them manage their working capital. So can you see it? Can you measure it? Can you monitor it? Can you benchmark it? And lastly, can you sell it? Can you sell it to get an investment into it? So that's the process that I go through in looking at this working capital component selection. So as I mentioned, you want to look at, okay, what are the components that we need? Prioritize those. These are the ones I need to look at. Once we select the components, come up with a couple different ways to impact the efficiency of working capital. So how do I optimize working capital? And then once I have those, then I construct my battle plan, sell it, and execute it. So we're going towards the component selection. So again, we talked about cash, but let's just take a quick look at cash in this framework. Can you see it? Well, how do you usually see it? You can see it through your ERP system, your Treasury workstation. If you have one, bank platforms. There's also obviously Treasury management systems. There's cloud-based Treasury management systems. And then can you measure it? What's the information reporting? Can you monitor it? Analytical tools and staff. And that's really where you get at the visibility. The problem that I had was the first 3 were very difficult in terms of time and cost. But now with these Treasury management systems that they have now, some of them offer this visibility in a very cost-effective manner. They work directly with your banks to coordinate the reporting that they need. And many of them also have Swift connectivity, so it's really amazing what you can pull up in the morning. You can see your global cash position. You can see it by currency. Some of the systems even go as far as suggesting or executing foreign exchange transactions, making investments for you. So it's amazing. It depends on what your company needs, but again, it depends on your company complexity. So that visibility, I'd say even if you have 5 bank accounts across 5 different banks, it's actually a lot more cumbersome than someone in Treasury might not think, let alone if you have hundreds of bank accounts across multiple countries. So then you see it and benchmark it. So in our cash, maybe you want to look at liquidity ratios, and you want to be able to do some peer comparisons. And we'll talk about benchmarking and peer benchmarks. And then obviously last part is, okay, it's a problem. Okay, can I fix the problem? Can I sell it? Can I make it a priority at my company? For cash, the hurdle's not so big. I think even the CEOs are now more focused. Cash is king, and the cost of ineffective cash deployment. So I think that hurdle has gone down quite a bit. And especially in the technology space, what we're starting to see now is we're starting to see a lot more focus on visibility into cash inflows and cash outflows. So we really started the cloud revolution in CRM systems, client relationship management. Then when we went more towards ERP and financial management systems, and we got into corporate performance management, and then finally the eyes were opened up and say, hey, well, what about cash management? What about Treasury? What about risk management? And now the sweet spot of Treasury is getting the attention that it deserves, because at the end of the day, for many companies, the effectiveness of cash deployment can determine the velocity of company growth. So if you look at cash, I like to look at certain metrics, but I like to look at the cash conversion cycle because it really helps us look at the dynamics between AP, AR, and also inventory. So I'm not going to read through the ratios. Pretty common. These are just some of the metrics that we might want to look at. In terms of metrics, there's two components that are important. One is you want to be able to look at these metrics over time. So you want to have a historical perspective from your company. So what are we looking at? 2015, 2016, maybe third quarter versus second quarter versus first quarter, but also there might be some seasonality. So you might want to look at third quarter 2015 versus third quarter 2016. But almost as importantly, if not more importantly, is you need to be able to benchmark these against your competitors, against your industry. So you want to be able to see how you're doing relative to your peers, which are apple to apple, or your competitors, or your potential competitors. So we'll talk about how to access benchmarks and some trends that are going on in that area. But again, the process is, okay, I want to look at a component. What are my benchmarks? Do I have visibility into the variables that I need to construct these benchmarks? Okay, how do I look? Do I have the data to look backwards so I can predict? So the best case is I have the data, I have multi-year data, but I also have industry benchmarks year over year. I also have projections of what's going to go on in my industry in terms of payments and receivables. Now with that, how do I forecast things more effectively in terms of what I'm going to need for my cash outflows, and so how am I going to be able to improve my cash deployment across the enterprise. So again, I just get back, this is obviously a favorite slide of mine. So I look at the cash conversion cycle. So you want to look at the flow within each, and then it's very amazing in the visibility that you can have now, because a lot of these treasury management systems are very integrable with your ERP systems, with your CRM systems like Salesforce.com. So the information that you have is incredible. So you can see if there's any friction going on in our cycle, where that friction might be coming from. If you're having forecasting errors, what the problem is. On the AR side, which has been phenomenal for me to see, is you can look at that sales pipeline, and that visibility is going well beyond the sales team. So now it's going to the CFO. And so we can actually, and CFO and Office of CFO can play a role in looking at the health of that sales forecast to improve that sales forecast, really dig into the details of each deal, see what's going on. There's also these social chatter features in these applications where there can be communication. VP of Sales can go, hey, John, what's going on with customer A? You can be a significant customer. Hey, they usually give us a $2 million payment. Are we going to see that or not? We need to know. So what's going on? What's the holdup on the accounts payable side as well? And so you can get that visibility into those supplier relationship management. One of the huge things that I've seen is in taking discounts. It's extremely expensive really not to take discounts when they're offered, and that visibility allows you to see how effective you are in taking those discounts, and gives you information into, okay, in the accounts payable cycle, where are we being inefficient? If there's more efficiency, then you might have more days or more flexibility in negotiating with your suppliers. And you also need to look at how you're paying your suppliers, right? So checks are very expensive if you look at that. Some people find that shocking. So it's about how you pay your suppliers, but then you can also put metrics around each arrow and say, okay, this is taking longer, that's taking longer, and then you can dig in and say why. Why is it taking longer? We receive products. I don't want to necessarily pay for them right away, but I want to be able to have them set up for payment. I want to be able to receive my products as soon as possible. Okay, what's going on, right? Why am I not getting my products? Of course, we want to get our money as soon as possible, and we want to deliver the velocity of our sales. But this is just key to me. It kind of shows me that this interdependency is there. So optimizing that cash deployment is key. So let's take a step back in terms of benchmarking. So for me, the cat's meow in benchmarking is having peer benchmarks. So companies in my industry, and if you can't have that, companies that have similar flows. So if I'm a retail company, I'd find it extremely valuable to have a retailer. Might not be exactly in my space, but they might have similar cash inflows, outflows. They might use the same types of treasury management system that I use. They might use the same ERP. So that's fantastic. So what are some sources to get in that peer benchmarking? There's consulting firms. There's accounting firms. I'd say professional advisors. There's system providers. I'm seeing a lot more treasury management systems providers get in this space. And I think that's where you can have a tremendous opportunity. Some banks offer this information. There's some professional organizations. But if I look at the top four, the concern that I often have there is the timeliness of the benchmarks and the frequency in which you have access to them. So oftentimes they might be only done like once a year. Well, once a year, I need it once a quarter. I need it at least once a quarter. So how do I do that? So kind of the fifth level down is a higher hurdle. But if you can do kind of the DIY and really get into a small peer group and really have a group of 5 to 10 treasury professionals that have the same inflows and outflows that you might have, face similar issues, have the same, maybe use the same systems. So the DIY small peer group is a place where I see some opportunity. But then again, depending where the treasury management system providers want to come in, they could really change the ball game there. So if they can really figure out how to package the data and get it out to folks in a cost-effective manner, that could really change the ball game in terms of benchmarks. It can really help firms of all sizes really impact their working capital management efficiency. So just wanted to share, if you want to look at peer benchmarking, had the opportunity to work on a webinar a few years ago with Chris Hansen, the assistant treasurer. He was assistant treasurer at Brocade Communications, had some great, so you'll get the slides to review after my course. So you look at this, benchmarking needs to be practical. The time commitments need to dictate the scope. You want to select areas where people want to overperform. So in Treasury, you want to look at having incentives for compensations tied to benchmarks, and the cat's meow is to tie the benchmarks to departmental and company goals, and that's great on multiple levels. One is it keeps your people focused on the right thing, but then you can show the CFO and the CEO how improvements in your department are impacting the bottom line. A point here, you might want to avoid benchmarking with direct competitors, but again, it just depends on how tight your space might be. Peer benchmarking, done right, can offer you information that can actually lead to competitive advantage. Anything that helps you have better relationships with your suppliers and your customers is key. Again, I've seen this focus on customer relationships, which I completely agree with 100%, but in my mind, I think companies would do better to also pay attention to supplier relationships, because I believe the right supplier relationships is really where companies can really drive sustainable competitive advantage if they have that great relationship and flexible relationship and strategic relationship with their suppliers. A lot of times innovation comes from communication with suppliers, and then also if you have great relationships on both sides, you can also find some synergies on your suppliers and your customers, and have some good innovative growth coming from those as well. So let's take a look. So we talked about cash, and then I took a step back, benchmarking. Now let's look at accounts receivable. Let's go back to our process. Can you see it? Accounts receivable. again, I think it's still the most common, I believe, is still probably your ERP system. Measure it, information reporting, that could come from your ERP system. It could also come from your treasury management system. If you're able to pull in that data from your ERP, can you monitor it? There's analytical tools often in systems. A lot of people still use Excel. Got to have the staff to do that. Can you benchmark it? A common benchmark is DSO. I'll talk about a couple other metrics, cash cycle, and then you want to have those peer comparisons as well. And then the last part is, can you sell it? And then you want to be able to quantify the cost of giving terms. So going from 30 days to 45 days to 60 days, what is that costing our company? So a couple metrics here. Again, I won't spend too much time on these. A lot of these are pretty common, and you'll have access to the slides. Most common, I would say, is days sales outstanding. The two metrics that I like, which I don't see used as often as I'd like to see, is best possible days sales outstanding. It uses only a company's current non-delinquent receivables to approximate the shortest amount of time a company should expect in turning over receivables. So it kind of gives us, it helps us better predict cash. And then also true DSO calculates the actual number of days credit sales are unpaid by tracking individual invoices to the month of sale. So that lets us go a little bit deeper, go into the individual invoices. You might want to look at customers. You might want to look at the seasonality of the customers. So you might be able to get some insight into the payment trends of your customers. You might see that their payment terms, when they pay, goes up and down. So there could be big swings depending on the time of year so when they're actually able to pay. So you might want to even that out in management. So again, metrics are key. DSO is common, but I like these other metrics as well, and I would take a look at all three of those. And I like more than one metric, but I think the best possible DSO and true DSO are other ways to really understand the dynamics of accounts receivable and identify ways to impact those and better improve your relationship with your customers. And then another point that I mentioned is helps us sell it is the cost of extending terms. Sometimes our sales professionals don't understand what it costs in terms of open invoices. So I'll just give you an example. You might want to share, you might want to pump the numbers up on the sale. So just an example, a sales rep thinks he wants to hit a sales quota. So he does it by going, he says, common terms are 30. I'll give my customer 45 days so I can close a deal for $500K. So let's assume the cost of capital to the company is 10%. Well, then the cost of extending those terms for those extra 15 days is over $2,000. Huge company, multiply that, make that number 10 million, 100 billion, $1 billion, and you'll see that goes off the rails pretty quickly. In my mind, there should be specific guidance on giving terms, and there should be a structure that's monitored and who can approve variance on terms. And if there are things that are going on in the industry which dictate terms, well, that needs to be into the policy. Any exceptions to the policy, I believe, should go all the way up to the VP of sales and in certain times go up to the CFO, so people are making informed decisions in terms of what is really costing the company to extend those terms. And it's not just an excuse that that's what everybody else is doing. Okay, maybe that's the case. If we don't do that, what's the impact going to be? Put some probabilities on there, because once you give away terms, it's really hard to get those back. So now we'll look at AP. Again, the same analysis, similar to AR in terms of can you see it? Still on the ERP side, information reporting. Again, integrability between the ERP and a treasury management system is incredibly valuable here, or some people will do it in Excel. You have analytical tools, you have Excel, you have treasury management workstations, and other types of applications available. There are some treasury modules from certain ERP systems, but in general, I have found them not to be as user-friendly as I would like. And then how do you benchmark it? I will look at days payable, outstanding. We'll look at the cash conversion cycle. There's cash turnover. And then can you sell it? And here's something I mentioned earlier. We need to quantify the cost of not taking discounts and having the ability to negotiate. So obviously, on the surface, yeah, I want to delay paying as much as possible without impacting relationships. However, if you're offered a discount, the cost of taking a discount is often incredible. And also, something that I always find pretty amazing is that the amount of duplicate invoices that are paid. So I've seen as high as 5 to 10%. So those errors are costing money. Sometimes companies never even know that they've done it, or chasing the money around, not having it, not having millions and millions of dollars for 15 days. We saw that in our earlier slide. So those are things which make it easier to sell. And there's also a lot of inefficiency in the manual intervention in the accounts payable process, and that can go all the way from onboarding into the types of payments made. And what I've seen in AP automation is just this tremendous focus in terms of even the demand for educating Treasury professionals. Right now it's 2016, and for probably 3 or 4 years until 5 years up to 2015, didn't have maybe one request to speak as a subject matter expert on accounts payable. In 2016, over the course of 4 months, I had 6 requests to speak as a subject matter expert on accounts payable automation as people started to see the value here. So AP touches so many people. There's so many possible points of inefficiency, and so this slide just kind of gives a little bit of point of some of these inefficiencies. Capture the invoice, manage the account. There can be inefficiencies in the approval of the payment, and then launching the payment, and then all these things just muck up the process. Any kind of manual intervention, manual routing, the decentralization of invoice receipt, you get a large number of exceptions. So these are all the problems that our AP folks face, and mitigating those can be tremendously valuable to the company just in terms of efficiency and cost savings. And now a lot of the AP automation solutions are really focusing on the whole process, all the way from supplier onboarding, which can be tremendously inefficient, all the way to the payments being made. And I'm talking about the actual affecting of the payments. As I mentioned before, some of these AP automation providers are actually providing services where they will actually pay all of your suppliers, and even if that's in foreign currencies. So the opportunities there are tremendous. Got to look at the cost effectiveness and ROI for your company. But again, so I think we're starting to see in the AR space, we're seeing great solutions. In the AP space, we're seeing great solutions. I think there's integrability there, right? So maybe you go best in breed in cloud, the AP and AR, but you really want to have a set of systems that are integrable where you can manage that whole cash conversion cycle. And it's really exciting for me to see how far that technology has come. So AP is a hot area, and I don't see that going away, because again, I think another thing that's going to start driving it is if we start seeing more focus on supplier relationship management, not just supply chain financing, but supplier relationship management as well. If we look at AP metrics, I mentioned DPO. That's pretty common, and here's probably one of my favorites: percentage of early discounts captured. So you want to look at the efficiencies in taking advantage of a discounted terms offered by company suppliers. In general, a quick analysis will show you it almost never makes sense not to take a discount. You may even want to negotiate discounts. So this is something, and you have to have visibility in order to do this. So this is a metric which I would recommend. And then also looking at goods received and not invoiced. So you want to look at the lags in all these areas. So let's take a step back up. So we talked about how to identify the components. Before we look at working capital battle plan, let's just move back one time and talk about cash one more time. I really like the slide, cash visibility. You need to be able to determine the cost of cash movements. Visibility allows you to understand your FX exposures and identify natural hedging opportunities. It allows you to raise your order to cash IQ, raise your purchase order to payment IQ, and understand the hows and whys of AP, AR, and inventory account dynamics, which is critical to optimizing working capital. And then the visibility, again, 2 pieces: visibility control. Cash control is key. The right people have the ability to move funds at the right time and the impact of the effectiveness on working capital management. So you need that visibility and control, and cash is really what can move the velocity of a company's growth and ultimately shareholder value. So let's say, take a step back. So we've got our working capital components. Okay, we've got some ideas how to improve in terms of technology we might want to leverage and processes we might want to look at. So how do we create this battle plan? So you want to create a business plan and present it to all those who will be asked to invest in your project. So whose help do you need to make this work? What changes are going to be you're going to need to make in AP, AR, even within your own department? Who are we going to need to be a spokesperson for our project, an evangelist? So you want to obtain buy-in and access to internal expertise up and down the org chart. So the key there is, the people that are going to hold the most resistance, that don't like change, you need to go after them first and get their buy-in and get them to help you define the project, and that takes away a huge inherent barrier. You want to get that executive support, but again, there's always one person in the department that is really the heavy lifter. In AP, AR, every department, you want to engage that person because they really understand how things work, because they do it day in and day out. And any changes that you make, they know what the implications are going to be. And if you can convey that you understand what those changes mean to their managers, that's huge in terms of buy-in. You want to detail the components, and then you just want to convey your personal dedication and your vision to all investors. Really have passion for what you're talking about, and really show that you're considered all the implications, and that you're going to define the scope of the project. You want to develop a forecast. You want to design it so there's flexibility to engage colleagues if there's dynamics that might pull people away. You want to leverage the expertise outside of your department, and that includes technology providers and bank providers as well. You want to provide all invested parties benchmarks to monitor how the project benefits their departments, in addition to your organization. So if you're going to do a project that affects AP and the people, the folks who manage AP and AR, we want to give them metrics. We want to let them provide them the metrics, let them have visibility into it, let them have a vested interest in managing those metrics. In constructing the battle plan, you want to review internal process diagrams and matrices. You want to identify areas for internal collaboration and external collaboration. So you really want to build a team, because they're going to be critical in executing your project. There's no success in I. You want to focus on synergies to devise a working capital enterprise solution versus a capital component solution. And again, you want to identify internal resources and technology enhancements that offer benefits beyond a single working capital component, and take that up to the enterprise level. Again, you want to involve all internal parties affected. You want to identify internal acceptance hurdles and jump over them in the executive summary. So as you're putting pen to paper in the executive summary, you want to take the biggest objections will come up, and just address those right at the gate and disarm all those Mr. No's who are going to may stand in your way. You want to create a vision and lay out exactly what it will take to realize it. And then your expected results should include measurable benefits for all parties. You want to create the buy-in. A lot of the work going into developing the plan lays the groundwork. A world-class business plan is very persuasive. Again, you want to engage outside resources, but you also want to look at professional peers to learn how they successfully integrated what you're trying to do. And then you want to talk about it and generate a buzz. So you want to lay the groundwork, engage everyone, especially the people that might offer friction. You want to have a plan that's clear, concise, is measurable, aligns all the pieces together. So define roles and responsibilities and accountability with internal and external stakeholders. So anyone that impacts execution, to establish that accountability, define how all the pieces fit together, create and monitor benchmarks of success, and communicate them on an ongoing basis. So just because your project is implemented, keep on pushing out that information on the success. You should help create an environment of internal improvement, and most importantly, don't take your eye off the ball. Make metrics of progress, success, and make sure you always are watching those. and make sure things do not slide under your watch. In terms of managing a project, if you get stuck, this can be daunting sometimes. I always take a look at, okay, how can I improve in terms of these 6 areas? People, we talked about it. Internal and external consultants, that's your most valuable asset. Process, you got to have right process. So well-defined and efficient. What is the impact of what you might do on process? Communication is king here. You need to be able to get buy-in for people you're going to affect, and you're going to have to show them how it's going to make their lives easier. Like you mentioned, collaboration, alignment. So we don't want to have it managed silos, and then we got to look at technology and realize it's a key for efficiency and can be success, but it's not magic. So when I get stuck, I look at, okay, I'm stuck here, so how can I move forward? Do I need to leverage my people? Is it my process? Do I need to communicate better? How do I collaborate better? How do I create better alignment? Is there technology that's going to help me, not only with my project, but is there technology that's going to be able to allow my team to collaborate more effectively? So I'm also going to provide some resources which you can take a look at. So I just want to align these. So all of these are great resources relative to effective working capital management. I mentioned the AFP. There's the Institute of Finance Operations, which will help you on the AP side, the AR side, or organizations, National Association of Credit Managers. Tremendous opportunities to connect with peers and SMEs in LinkedIn groups. Those are just a few of the LinkedIn groups. So go to LinkedIn, find people, connect with them, ask questions. Performative has great online academy courses. There's an accounts payable network, upper level, slideshare.net, and YouTube as well. So those are all resources that I found valuable in staying on top of my game in effective working capital management. So a few closing thoughts to wrap things up. The key to effective working capital management really is understanding cash and cash movements inside and out, the hows and the whys. You want to identify opportunities by looking across the working capital spectrum, not in isolation at one component. Key rule is if you can't see it, you can't measure it, you can't monitor it, then you can't effectively manage it. So really visibility is your first step. And investing more in effectively managing cash can deliver dividends on many fronts, and world-class cash management and working capital management, it can absolutely fuel competitive advantage. So thank you very much for your valuable time. And if you have any questions about this content or anything else related to Treasury management, I have included my contact information on the slide, so I'm always happy to connect and answer those questions. So again, thank you very much for your valuable time, everyone.